Hey guys, what's up? I'm Greg Q. Together we're Mr. Happy 0121, and today we're doing our episode 2 review of Better Call Saul Season 2. The name of this episode, Cobbler.
Cobbler. Isn't that someone who fixes shoes?
Not the cobbler, not a cobbler.
But just cobbler.
Cobbler.
Oh, because the...
And I assume that people that have watched the show know why it's called that, but we'll get to that soon enough. This week is going to be a little bit short. There were a lot of long, lingering shots of nothing in this episode, which we'll address later as well. So our normal runtime will probably be a little shorter. We're going to blow through a few things. Show opens with Chuck at a piano. The song he is playing, I'm going to see if I can say it properly, is Sicilian. It is a story of a brother that finds out that his wife is in love with his other brother.
Oh.
Which, knowing this show, it could be one of two things. It could be just a song Chuck's playing at the piano, or it could be foreshadowing, because there is mention that Chuck was once married, and we haven't had a clear indication of why Chuck really seems to have a hate on for his brother. Just throwing that out.
It's a good point.
Next, Howard stops by the house with some ice and some munchies for his buddy Chuck. They do a little bonding, a little friendly. Things get interesting, though. How you like my pronunciation of interesting?
I like it.
Howard kind of tells a little bit of a white lie to Chuck when talking about Jimmy getting a job at Davis and Maine. He very much underplays his part in helping Jimmy get that job. In fact, he kind of blames it on Kim. My feeling is that Howard really isn't a bad guy. I feel he's a little bit scared of Chuck.
Really?
If you see how he defers to Chuck constantly, or he does exactly what Chuck tells him, even though it's unpleasant, I think he's in fear of Chuck for some reason. If you go back to the end when Jimmy and Chuck are facing each other and Howard finds a lame reason to excuse himself quickly away from the situation, it's just another indication he doesn't want to be present if there's a chance Chuck could be embarrassed. We then skip ahead to Kim in the boardroom for the cross-lawyer meeting of Davis and Maine and the McGill law firm. This kind of runs throughout the rest of the show, interspersed in between things. The only thing that really happens here is we see Kim move Jimmy to sit next to her, which turns out in Jimmy's favor later because he needs her. We then go to a point that it doesn't really say when this is. This show is kind of out of time because you have the board meeting interspersed in between parts. The only real Easter egg of this video, or this show, the last episode, was full of Easter eggs.
Oh, yeah.
In this one, Kim buys Jimmy the world's second best lawyer tumbler. Those of you that know Saul Goodman, he's world famous for having the world's best lawyer mug. So it's kind of a callback to show you a juxtaposition, there's a word for you, of where he is now and where his ego becomes later. We then show him with the new tumbler, turning in his old car and getting a Mercedes. There's a little symbolism here when he goes to get into the Mercedes. He puts his new tumbler in and it won't fit. Maybe it's some kind of a sign that the life he's living isn't quite right. He then says goodbye to the ladies at the manicure or pedicure shop. Goodbye, ladies.
Goodbye,
and off
ladies.
we go. We now cut to Mike in his little box. Mike spends a lot of time in his box. Who rolls up but Price in his big yellow Hummer? Price had no clue that Mike worked here. He was just going to meet with the police about the robbery. At this point, Mike gets the information of the last episode from Price that he was robbed and that the police want to talk to him. Mike fills him in on what a fishing trip is and the fact that the police are really after more information than about his lost cards. He tries to talk Price into not going in. Finally, the way he gets Price to agree to that is by agreeing to get Price's baseball cards back for him. So he sends Price on his way and tells him to ignore the police. Mike now will take over the investigation of the missing baseball cards for a small fee. We now just kind of have an interlude of Jimmy sitting at his desk hearing a guitar. He gets up from his desk and wanders through the law office to find Cliff Maine playing a guitar. They have a little exchange. Nothing really happens. I really think this is more of an excuse just to get Ed Begley's character into this episode.
Yeah.
I think there's going to be some stuff going on later, and they just needed him to show his face just so you remember that he's on the show. We now cut to Mike, who was at the upholstery shop. Now, Mike once told Walter White that he could track him down and find any information on him within 3 hours. So we have it established in the past, or in this case, in the future that Mike has tracking skills. As a policeman, it's pretty easy. As somebody that used to do bill collecting, you can run a thing called a skip trace and find anyone if you have the right contacts. Yeah, pretty easy. So Mike shows up at a undisclosed upholstery shop and starts speaking to a Spanish man up front, an older Spanish man. Turns out this is Nacho's father. And what are the odds? Nacho's father calls him up front to deal with Mike in the upholstering of his car. Now I'm going to skip through some stuff because, again, there was a lot. It felt like they were just stretching scenes to stretch them in this episode. Long story short, Mike gets Nacho alone, makes a deal with him that's going to net Nacho $60K, but Mike wants the baseball cards and $10,000 back. There's no real indication of where the $60,000 is going to come from, so we leave it at that. Quick insert shot of Chuck at home with his tinfoil suit. He's going back to work. Then we cut back to Price. This time he's in the desert meeting with Nacho again, giving up the keys to his Hummer. He gets all of his baseball cards back, and Nacho hands Mike a fat yellow envelope, which I assume has the $10,000 in it. That was his price for doing business with Price.
And they also concluded their business with Price.
At which point Nacho made it very clear that they were done. I don't think we've seen the last of Price. Although, when we get to the end of this, I really hope we have. Now we go back to the meeting that Kim was preparing for earlier. As I said, this is kind of going out of time, and they're not really explaining where the pieces fit. You just got to kind of pick it up. Jimmy's in the middle of speaking, doing a good job, being very impressive as a lawyer type guy. When Chuck shows up, totally derails his train of thought. Luckily for Jimmy, Kim is sitting right next to him. She puts her hand on his leg, and it focuses Jimmy, brings him back, and he's able to continue. There we go. After the meeting, Chuck wants to have a word with Jimmy, but Jimmy's not into it at all. Basically, Jimmy asks Chuck why he is there, and Chuck says he is there to bear witness. Ominous words, but I don't know if he's there to bear witness to Jimmy's failure or Jimmy's success. At this point, Mike randomly calls Jimmy. Not really randomly, they have an established relationship, but he calls Jimmy to help him out with the Price problem. Jimmy goes in, meets with the police on Price's behalf, which we find out later he's doing this for free, which is kind of unusual because Jimmy isn't really the kind of guy to do things for free.
But I'm sure he likes that. He's getting more than just money from doing things like that, you know?
I have a theory about that we'll kind of close with. Basically, he has to tell this outlandish story to the police to get Price off the hook. He tells them that the hidey hole was used for Squat Cobbler videos, which is something he totally made up as far as I know, at least that terminology. It's a man sitting in a pie while crying and wiggling. So these were some kind of sex videos sent back and forth between...
Fetish videos?
Fetish videos sent back and forth between Price and a benefactor. Now, of course, none of this really happened. He was just trying to make up something uncomfortable for the police. And if the lie's big enough, usually people will believe it. Jimmy does get Price off the hook. Here's something I kind of wondered, though. Jimmy takes great delight in buying a bunch of pies, and then off camera, he apparently has Price make a video. It made me wonder, was the video necessary, or was this something that Jimmy did for his own amusement?
That's a good point.
The episode ends with him talking to Kim about this, and she gets really upset, says that he fabricated evidence and that he could be disbarred and lose his ability to practice law and a bunch of other things for this. She very succinctly says to him, I can't ever hear about this type of thing again. Which indicates to me the wording was very precise. She didn't say, don't ever do this type of thing again. She said she can't hear of it. At which point he repeated, you will never hear of this type of thing again. Which is like an implicit understanding between the two that he's going to do what he's going to do and she just don't need to know about it. Now, here's my thought, and then if you differ on this, let me know.
All right.
The end of this show was a mirror image of the end of the last show. At the end of the last show, for no reason whatsoever, he was compelled to flip the switch, which should not be flipped. For no gain whatsoever in this show, he put his entire law career on the line just to do something he shouldn't, because that's what's inside of him. There's something
Yeah.
inside him that makes him want to do what he's not supposed to, and he almost can't help himself. It's like his sickness.
Sickness.
I think that's going to be the theme. Like, as this goes on, I think maybe it'll escalate. First episode was a switch. This episode, he's fabricating evidence.
I don't know if it's necessarily like an impulse to go against like something or like rebel like that, but he enjoys like being like a Saul Goodman type character, you know.
I think it's very much up in the air. I don't know if it's who he is, or if it's a reaction deep down to like a deep-seated hatred towards his brother, who is just the opposite of everything he is. They haven't really revealed that yet, but I really feel that we're seeing the beginning of a snowball. As the season goes on, he's going to progress just a little more every so often with everything he does. Any thoughts, anything you want to add about this episode?
Not at all. I think what you just had there was really interesting, really insightful.
Before we grade this, I want to say this. Not every episode can be the greatest. This episode felt a lot like Lost to me for this reason. The TV show Lost, not it was Lost. Lost used to do a thing where every third or fourth episode, when the episode was over, if you watched them all in a row, you didn't notice it as much, but if you watched them individually and had to wait, it would sometimes bother you, because things would happen, but nothing great would happen. To launch a rocket, you have to have a base, and what this episode was a base. They set up a bunch of things, but it didn't really feel like anything happened. You reestablished Mike and Jimmy's relationship. The point where Jimmy is the crooked lawyer and Mike's the enforcer or the fixer, and they came together and worked on something. You established the fact that Nacho is still afraid of Tuco. You set up some dynamic between Jimmy and Chuck where they're gonna kind of be in the same room together, but they still hate each other.
It was kind of like an episode for like plot development, yeah?
Very much. So I feel like as the season goes on, way more than last episode where that was just fun, them getting a guy drunk and like stealing money from him, it didn't really build toward anything. What I think this episode is the base for this season. So having said all of that, like when this season's over, maybe we'll go back and talk about it and see where they laid everything out for the season in this episode. But until then, my personal grade for this episode, B. And I would dare say probably my least favorite episode of Better Call Saul out of the 12.
I'll give it a B too. It was a slow episode, but it was still good. The ending. I like the ending.
Yeah. And I for the future, I think this episode is going to pay off. There was a lot of things they set up here. But for today, not the greatest episode. Anything you want to add before we go?
Not at all.
All right. I talked a lot in this video, and you talked a little. There wasn't a lot to really dissect or get into in this one. Maybe next week. Hopefully so. Till next time, stay vigilant. Thanks for watching.